In this video, I'll go over my top 40 running back rankings for week 11 of fantasy football with every single running back and every single matchup with specific data proving my points in that. If you do appreciate that and want a statistical advantage for the rest of the season to guarantee yourself playoff spots and a championship, hit that subscribe button, takes 2 seconds, and like the video if you want some good luck for fantasy this week. But I don't waste time. Number 1 in the S tier is going to be CMC, back to his reign at being the number 1. We've been holding him for this long for a reason. In his first game back, he wasn't really that efficient, if we're being 100% honest. 13 carries, 39 yards, it's 3 yards per carry, and it's really the receiving upside that's keeping him valuable, even if he doesn't have a good game in carries and touches on the ground. So that's going to help him be a lot more viable in a neutral matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. You'd expect him to see more touches in his second game removed from a pretty serious injury. He did pop back up on the injury report, questionable with that same Achilles though, so make sure you are aware of that situation if it does linger for the rest of this week coming into Sunday. But Joe Mixon is the RB2 for the week here. An extremely favorable matchup here against the Cowboys, who are 7th in points allowed to running backs this year. That might be pretty surprising because the Dallas Cowboys defense has been pretty good in previous years, but they are falling off right now. The Texans should definitely be able to control pace here, especially now that we have Nico Collins coming back. Mixon has scored a touchdown in every single healthy game that he's played this year so far. Following that, with the RB3 in the S tier, we're going to have Devon Achane. Similar to CMC, it does not matter what kind of usage he sees on the ground and how good this offense is, because with Tua healthy, he's averaging 6 receptions for 60 yards a game, and he saw 50 yards last week. But dropping it down to the A tier of running backs, we're going to be starting with Alvin Kamara. If you see a trend here, these receiving running backs are very, very good, and atop the list because of that. He's the RB1 in target share this year at 23.8%, which is higher than most receivers in the NFL right now. As long as he doesn't get a touchdown stolen, he will be a startable guy, but unfortunately for the Saints offense, that seems to happen a bit more than you'd want it to. But the RB5 is going to be Kyren Williams against the Patriots, who allow the 4th most success to running backs and yards this year. He's a pure volume guy. He's the RB1 in rush share. He's the RB3 in total carries per game. We have Cooper Kupp and Puka healthy in this offense. The touchdown upside is going to be there. They should be rolling. Next up, we do have Bijan Robinson and Derrick Henry tied up here, with Bijan averaging over 100 all-purpose yards a game since week 5. He's getting a positive matchup here against the Broncos run defense, which is about middle of the pack. But again, over the last 5 games, it doesn't seem like that matters for Bijan Robinson. And you speak of upside with touchdowns, Derrick Henry has had one in every single game this year. He's the RB5 in carries, RB1 in yards per carry, which is what you want to see. And they do get a tough matchup against the Steelers as far as yards allowed to running backs goes, but fantasy points in general, they're not as negative as you'd think. They allow 17.9 fantasy points a game to the running back position, and they've allowed 4 straight touchdowns in 4 straight games against running backs this year. So dropping it down to the B tier, we're going to have the RB9 in Jahmyr Gibbs against the Jaguars, which is a top 3 team in points allowed to running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, everything. They're not good. The Lions should absolutely boat race this team. He's had over 100 yards in 5 out of his last 8 games. Extremely efficient, used in the run game and the receiving game a good amount. That's what you want to see. Next up, Jonathan Taylor. Richardson is coming back into this offense, which does hurt his upside. Still going to be a startable guy, though, against the Jets, who allow over 18 fantasy points a game. They are a little bit easier against the run than they are the pass. The pass is pretty tough, but he can get it done on the ground. Again, as long as Anthony Richardson doesn't steal a touchdown, he will be startable. Breece Hall, next up on the other side of the ball here. The Jets offense is very bad right now, which lowers his upside for sure, but he does get usage in the receiving game, and even if he is splitting a little bit with Braylon Allen, it shouldn't be too bad in a game where the Jets need to start winning despite what the matchup is, and the matchup is good. The Colts allow a decent amount of points to running backs this year. But the RB12 here, Kareem Hunt. Pacheco doesn't look like he's going to play this week against the Bills, which is a positive because Kareem Hunt thrives off volume and volume alone, and it is a positive matchup. The Bills are really tough against the pass, but one of the easiest in points to running backs, or top 5 actually in that statistic. It also helps that Hunt is the RB2 in carries per game, the RB1 in carries inside the 5 at 2.2 per game. So the touchdown upside is really high. We've seen that so far this year as well. Chase Brown next up. The Chargers aren't necessarily a really easy matchup, but he's had 32 and 22 touches in the last 2 games, coming off an 11 target game against the Ravens. As long as you see that type of usage in the receiving game and run all of the routes in this backfield, you're going to be a startable guy. Khalil Herbert does exist, but he's going to gradually start increasing his snaps as the weeks go on. Nothing to worry about yet. Finishing out this year with Kenneth Walker. He's been under the radar due to injury and bye weeks and just hasn't really been in the news as much. Comes into this matchup against the 49ers this week, which is neutral, not as bad as you think, but he's the RB4 in routes run per game, the RB9 in carries inside the 5, and the RB8 in rush share. He is a workhorse running back. He probably will find the end zone. He does when he gets the usage. So moving it down to the C tier here, we're going to have Josh Jacobs and Aaron Jones. Jacobs gets the Bears off the bye week, which it's a tough matchup for sure. Definitely one of the tougher ones. The offense, though, they just can't move the ball. Maybe with a change of offensive coordinator, they can switch that around. But as of now, they should be able to control this game a good amount and stick to a run-heavy script. Jones is dealing with an injury, but Kevin O'Connell has come out and said that he expects him to play. So he'll probably give him some shots, do what he has to do, give him some drugs, I don't know. But get him to go and get him to play. Monty and James Cook comes next with Swift to finish out this tier. like Gibbs, it's an insanely positive matchup. He's averaging over 70 rushing yards and a touchdown in the last 7 out of the 9 games that he's played this year. Nothing's going to change there, but James Cook does get a really tough matchup, the toughest of the week against the Chiefs. They're allowing under 10 fantasy points a game to running backs since week 6 and only 3.2 yards per carry. But in his usage in the receiving game in a pass-heavy offense and usage at the goal line, Ray Davis doesn't really get any of that. He's still going to be started in this matchup regardless. Swift, another guy seeing a ton of usage but held back by the offense here. Maybe this offensive coordinator change is going to help the team out and let them move the ball more, but Caleb Williams has been sacked 14 times in 2 games. You'd think that they'd utilize the check down because more than half of the snaps that he got sacked on, DeAndre Swift ran a route. So you'd think they just throw down to the check down and get the running backs involved, but for some reason that hasn't been happening. There was so many other issues. Taking it down to the D tier, we're going to be starting with J.K. Dobbins and Ramondre. Gus Edwards is back. It definitely does lower the upside of J.K. Dobbins, but the usage for the most part is still there regardless if the snaps are lower. And it's a matchup against the Bengals, which is average as far as fantasy points to running backs allowed goes. But the good news is that their offense has been absolutely amazing, so you'd expect them to try to match that pace and just get a bunch of offense and yards with it, which is why Justin Herbert is one of the better streaming options at quarterback this week if you do need that. But with Ramondre Stevenson, he's one of the more inconsistent running backs because of his offensive line. Now getting a matchup against the Rams defense, who has been very tough on the ground as of late. But on the good news, he's had 74% of the RB usage since week 8 and somehow finds the end zone in almost every game. So as long as that happens, we're going to be starting him. Nick Chubb next gets one of the easiest matchups of the week against the Saints, allowing 5.56 yards per carry since week 6. That is crazy. Really the only reason he's this high is because the matchup is so good. The efficiency this year hasn't really looked great, but the offense isn't the best anyways. Tony Pollard next up here with Najee Harris in the D tier. Both of these guys are competing for snaps in their backfield. Tony Pollard played 53% of the snaps compared to Tyjae Spears at 46 last week. That split is probably going to continue, but Tony Pollard does see the usage again, like Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. He's just not going to see as much field time. The numbers should be there for him, though. But we're going to have Will Levis in this offense this week, which makes it a lot harder to trust him and not as much upside. But again, the volume keeps him consistent. As long as that doesn't go away, he will be fine. For Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren is 100% back into this offense. Before he got banged up late in the fourth quarter, if you take that out, the time on field split with those two running backs, 48% to Najee, 42% for Jaylen Warren. So it's definitely getting closer. And they also tied in routes run out of the backfield. That's going to lower his upside. And it is a really tough matchup against the Ravens' run defense. Their pass defense, air it out, but their run defense is very, very tough. Moving it over to the E tier, we're going to be starting with Rico Dowdle and Travis Etienne. Dowdle really takes a hit, again with Cooper Rush at quarterback. Fantasy managers should not be too worried though, because the head coach has come out and said that he is the RB1 workhorse. There's nobody else in this backfield, and that's only going to continue to build as the weeks go on. He's been efficient. He's been the best running back. You'd hope that this offense can actually move here against a tougher defense in the Texans this week. With Travis Etienne, he can move up if Tank Bigsby does miss this week. He is questionable with an ankle injury, and he gets a matchup against the Lions, which is one of the tougher ones. So we're going to need Bigsby out of this offense for him to really be a trustworthy start, but he gets usage in the receiving game, and in this Lions matchup, you'd expect them to be playing from behind. So maybe he'd get even more usage in the receiving game, and he does run a ton of routes, so maybe that's his path to upside in this matchup. Next up with Jaylen Warren, similar to what we talked about with Najee, he's splitting snaps with him. He gets used in the receiving game. That's going to keep him in here. Then we're going to have Audric Estime and Javonte Williams tied up here in this tier. We don't really know what to expect. I know a lot of people are going through and starting Audric Estime with no worries. I've been talking about this backfield for a while now. You really can't just predict what's going to happen. Sean Payton does not care. He'll give anybody touches. Audric Estime is likely going to open as the RB1, but Javonte by no means is out of this offense at all. Javonte will probably get more usage in the receiving game. Audric Estime ran almost no routes out of the backfield last week, so his usage is coming off straight volume. And in a tougher matchup this week against the Falcons, you're going to hope that he can actually see volume and the Broncos will stay in games. Luckily, Bo Nix has been playing good enough to where that's not an issue, but if they do get down in this game, expect Javonte Williams to be that one that puts up the better fantasy football number. But starting in the F tier, we're going to have Tyjae Spears, Alexander Mattison, and Gus Edwards. As we continue to see Spears healthy and get used in the receiving game, that's going to keep him valuable in PPR leagues. Mattison, he's named the RB1, but how much does that really matter in a Raiders offense that isn't good? We have Gardner Minshew at quarterback, so maybe that brings a spark back to this offense, but against the Dolphins, it is a positive matchup for running back, so maybe he can be there. Gus Edwards saw a 25% snap share last week in his first game coming off IR, so that is positive for him. I wouldn't necessarily be throwing him into my starting lineup, but as the weeks go on, he'll continue to increase his snaps, probably to a max of 60-40 with him and J.K. Dobbins, but he does get receiving work out of the backfield and run some good routes, so that's always a plus for him. They'll be playing behind in this matchup again, so it is a good opportunity. Next up in the G tier, we're going to finish out with some handcuff running backs you can start, but not really going to be the best options here. Tank Bigsby, if he does play, Jerome Ford, Zach Charbonnet, and Braylon Allen. That is going to finish off the running back rankings here. I appreciate you guys watching all the way through. Shout out to the man above, and I will see you in the wide receiver tiers coming tomorrow.